I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Yes and Russell Brand. Today, I'll be saying yes to Russell's interview with Tom Kerridge, the Michelin-starred chef and founder of Meals for Marlowe that delivered 100,000 meals to frontline workers during the pandemic. In particular, I want to say yes to Tom's democratization of food preparation, aka cooking. And I'd like to add the democratization of food production as a possible way of making all those expensive ingredients that would go into cooking good meals much more accessible. And I also want to look at our food ethic and how we determine what it is that is. So let's start with the democratization of cooking. Food is big on my agenda. One of my websites is foodinthehood.org, where I have dozens, maybe 100 different menus of meals that my daughters and I produced as fundraisers for global charities. People would come, they would eat whatever they wanted, and then they would just donate whatever they wanted to a cause that we would present. And it was always something global, from Western sawaris to Latin America to Haiti. And so that was a really wonderful thing, and it gave a way of really bringing people together and introducing different causes in a way that didn't put them on the defensive, because once they had participated, that made them all on the same side. And it was really a wonderful thing. So I've become much more known for my cooking than for my ideas, which is setting a pretty low bar. However, I think that the democratization of food production, aka farming, is another topic that I'm very excited about, and have been very involved in. There's the Grange, is a local coalition, a national coalition of farmers who did amazing things in the populist rebellion 100 years ago. And so being close to my local farmers has been a really important thing to me. At some point, Tom talks about the dilemma that for people who are on a budget and cooking, all of these ingredients are just very expensive, and it's so much cheaper not to even consider the more convenient to go out and buy the kids a burger or some kind of fast food than it is to make real food. That is so wrong. And I think that in the world that I would like to see, we would all be spending a big part of our days in food production and food preparation, because eating is what we do. And it's the thing that we need to do again and again and again. Other products you can create once and they're there, but food is something that is continual. And so I think that if we lived in the real world, namely a world without slavery, where we produce essentially what we consume, most of our working time would be spent around food. And so other places that have looked at that has been, there's this book, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Food Rights, the escalating battle over who decides what we eat. And this book, Land Justice, which is reimagining land, food, and the commons in the United States. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. And so the ideas that I look at are from my book, which is How to Dismantle an Empire. And the sequel to that will be How to Build a Commonwealth. And so the Commonwealth is the the land, the food shed, the area that you can farm together and be able to feed your community. So with looking at ways of being able to feed people, Russell really makes a beautiful statement when he talks about being vegan, and he says that that's his personal food ethic, but he doesn't impose that on anyone else because a greater value to him is being non-judgmental. And I think that is a wonderful perspective on it. And I think that food ethics are something that we should be talking about, that we should be not judging people because we're not in their circumstances, but we should be evaluating our own ideas and talking about them together. So at one point, there was a talk that I gave at the Grange called Animal Husbandry is the New Vegetarian. And in it, I looked at the different values that people involved in animal husbandry and people who were vegans or vegetarians shared. Number one was a concern for the well-being of animals and the fair treatment of workers. 2 was an interest in good nutrition. 3 was, I thought, a desire to not be wasteful, especially of water and of the environment. 4, a yearning for more self-reliance. And 5, an urgent sense that we needed to curb or even reverse climate change. So I looked at those 5 issues and how those values were met by animal husbandry in particular. And so the first one I look is the concern for well-being of animals. Now, we are all against CAFOs. CAFOs are container animal feeding organizations. And those are the most horrific things that can be imagined. It's torture. It's torture of animals. And so people who are spending their lives nurturing and raising animals for food are absolutely opposed to that kind of treatment of not just the animals, bad enough as that is, but also of the workers who are subjected to having to be in those kinds of environments. And one of the things we know in the pandemic is that those were the workers where they were spreading the virus like crazy because of the conditions, and they weren't allowed to close. The states couldn't even close them down, even though the towns were insisting on it. So we know that those are supported because they are profitable and because there are so many different ways that that's intertwined with government. So we vegetarians and animal husbandry people should be working together to be able to close those down, not, I think, turning on each other, because it's a lot easier to pick on the, small poultry producer down the street than it is to try to get in and film a CAFO, which is now illegal. If you pretend to be a worker and shoot footage inside one of these CAFOs, you will be arrested and sent to prison. So the second I'd look at is an interest in good nutrition. Now, a book that really made a big impression on me, because I don't think there's anything more powerful than a person who's changed their mind, is this one called The Vegetarian Myth by Lierre Keith. In it, she talks about having been a vegan for 20 years. And she gives a beautiful statement for what led her to be a vegan. This feeling of desperately needing to not be a part of the violence that's going on, and a need to really change the world and to put herself on the line and her values and just this this deep longing to make a difference, that she talks about touching on the spiritual, and that being something that she still has, that just motivated her for her whole life. But the conclusion that she came to is that vegetarians have been duped, is her term. And she has 5 different areas that she writes about. She writes about moral vegetarians, political vegetarians, nutritional vegetarians, and to save the world. 4. And in each of those areas, she goes through the thinking that she had. And the one on nutrition was very moving, because she looks at how harmful that was to her health and all the struggles that she had. And so I'll go into more depth on that in another show. And then looking at the desire to not be wasteful. I think that at some point Russell talks about how, his wife eats meat and his kids are vegetarian. And I find that one of the hardest things about having these different food ethics is that it's made eating together in community in a way that is not wasteful really difficult. Because being in animal husbandry, I am into whole hog. You use every part. You do the bone broth. You do you use everything. And so when you are mixing these different ethics, what you end up having is what I call the boneless, skinless chicken breast mentality. And in my home, I used to call it also the princess mentality, because it was like, okay, just give me the best. Just give me the best that I don't have to really deal with very much. And let other people, have the rest. So I look at how do you incorporate everything? And one of the most important things I think are fats, that you can find other sources of protein, but finding fats that are not synthetic, that are not destructive, that's, I think, a really difficult thing. And our bodies need fats. Our brains are made of fat. I am always preaching the gospel of fat. So I think that that's an important thing for us to be cognizant of, that looking at waste. And I mentioned water as one of those areas. A while ago, there was this thing, Cowspiracy, that was talking about how all of the water was used to produce animals, to produce meat. But in that, it was calculating in the rainfall for wild forage on fields, which I think was really cheating. And there was one that even that site quoted that said that really for direct use of water, that cows only use 2%, that all livestock only uses 2% of all the water that's used in agriculture. So the water in agriculture is primarily for grains. Grains are not what animals were made to eat, and perhaps not what we were intended to eat. All of the destruction of the soil structure has come from plowing. The Dust Bowl was caused by planting these crops that are every year plowed back up, so that you're just throwing all that dirt back in the air, you're destroying all the organisms, and you're creating this topsoil that then just blows away because there's no roots that are kept to it. So now there are a lot of different people working on regenerative agriculture, which is the only way to reverse climate change. And what they say is that if you could add, it's such a small amount, something like 1.3% more organic matter to all of the agricultural farmland in the world down to a 1 foot depth, that it would take our carbon back to pre-industrial levels. Because that carbon, what that does is that it pulls the CO2, that's what plants do. They pull CO2 from the air, and they plant it deep in the ground where it becomes the basis of the whole carbon cycle that produces food. And then they produce oxygen. So the whole concept that animals are destructive for that. So what they do now for regenerative agriculture is that they try to mimic the way that nature intended herd animals to move. So typically in the wild, cows, because of predators, go in tight groups with the young in the middle, and they will cross the land, and they'll be in one place, and they won't go back to that place for another 6 months. And so what farmers do now is that they will use fencing, electric fencing, and they move it, as they call, to a new salad bowl twice a day. So the cows will trample the ground, they'll create deep pockets, they'll deposit manure in those pockets, and they'll eat everything. I have a friend involved in this who also has young kids, and she describes it as the difference between giving a kid a bag of trail mix in which they eat out all the M&Ms and leave everything, all the peanuts and raisins, or giving them a handful and saying, when you finish that, I'll give you more. So if you let cows just go wherever they want, they eat all their favorite things, which means that all those favorite things don't grow back, and you leave all the things that they don't want. If you keep them in a tight group, they eat everything, and then they move, and they're not on that land for another 6 months. And so what that does is that it can create new topsoil, good humus, I think is how it's pronounced, 2 inches in a year. And that is what creates the grasslands. So there's many ranchers now who really see themselves as soil farmers. They're grass farmers. And the beef is a side product, but it is an essential side product, because if I look at the major difference between vegans or vegetarians and carnivores or animal husbandry, it's saying, no, we can't kill. And my friend who teaches animal husbandry at the Grange Farm School, what she talks about is the ancient contract when animals were first domesticated. And the ancient contract is a good life and a quick death. And that you need to keep both sides of that equation, that if you're not providing that, there's really no reason that that domesticated animals wouldn't exist. There would be no one raising cows, no one raising chickens. And all of our carnivore pets, I don't see how it could be justified for them to exist and for them to be fed without people. And so loving animals is really part of, I think, honoring that contract and saying, I will absolutely give you a good life and a quick death that is as painless as possible. And that keeps the cycle of life going, and acknowledges that we also have a right to exist, that and that we're part of that we are participants, and we're not just consumers. As consumers, it's easy to just sit on the sidelines and be judgmental. Lierre Keith also talks about wanting a full accounting of everything that died, everything that was killed in order to get that food on your plate, including the rivers that were dammed, the prairies that were cleared. She talks about how 98% of American prairies have now been cleared for grain monocultures. That in Canada, it's destroyed 99% of the original humus. And so if you look at these things, it's actually wheat that is the culprit and prairies that are the victim, and that is much more tied to climate change, and the only way really to reverse it is animal husbandry. And so I am eager to be continuing this conversation, and I'm glad that there is a way to have this in an environment of respect and non-judgment in looking at the ideas and loving the people who are so committed to wanting all the same things of a better world for everyone. Thank you. If you're intrigued and would like to go deeper into these ideas, here's another video on a related theme. And if you'd like to delve into this entire area, here's a playlist. Thank you, and I would love it if you would subscribe.